I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. Today, I'm re-releasing one of my most listened to episodes from the Rob Skinner Podcast. Listen as I interview Shawn Wooten, missionary to Eastern Europe and organizer of the Revive EE program. This episode really inspired me to fast, to pray, and to recommit to the mission. All this and more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no-regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Today on my podcast, I've got Shawn Wooten from Kiev, Ukraine. Shawn has been a missionary since the early 90s. He's been to Russia, he's been all over Eastern Europe, and he's still on the mission field 30 years later. He's one of the people that I respect the very most in the kingdom of God, and I'm looking forward to this interview today. Shawn, thank you for joining me.
Oh, amen. Thanks for inviting me. Happy birthday to your wife yesterday. I think it was her birthday.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. We had a great time together. She just keeps getting better and better. I'm so glad to be married to her.
Amen.
Well, Shawn, you're like I shared at the introduction. I mean, you have been all over the world. You're still preaching the word. You're making such a difference. You're an American living in Eastern Europe, in Kiev, Ukraine, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about all of this. How did you become a Christian? Tell me about your conversion story.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's great to be on this call with you, and the respect and admiration and inspiration is mutual. I've been following you for years. And I've always been inspired. And I think the initiative you've taken on to work with some of the smaller churches to get them multiplying is just an awesome focus. And we can talk about this more later, but I think the big churches have to learn how to be small churches. And I just think every church at a certain level needs to see itself as a small church. So I think you're doing some incredible work with that.
Thank you.
Also really enjoying your book. The whole team for Revive is, and I can share about that too. But as far as becoming a Christian, as a young kid, I had a very idealistic faith and this huge admiration for Jesus. But I hated church that I was drugged to on the weekends. And I literally couldn't, for the life of me, figure out why we were there. So I didn't enjoy that. And I was a tennis player. So as I got better in tennis, if you make it into the finals, you play on Sunday. So I worked really hard so I wouldn't have to go to church. What a motivation to become a good tennis player. So then, a little later on in life, as I became a teen, a lot of my friends would invite me to religious events. I was always in training, so I didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't go to parties, didn't have time for a girlfriend. But my friends would invite me to Christian things, yet they were going out and partying on Friday and Saturday. And I was like, this is just, you guys claim to have God in your life and you share with me as if I don't, yet your life doesn't resemble anything in my mind of godliness. And if you have God and I don't, then God must be incredibly weak.
Wow.
So I kind of landed on that. And my parents got a divorce when I was 16. So I just kind of had a shattered view of love and idealism and basically became an atheist. When I was at the university playing tennis, I played for the University of Kansas. And my summer gig was I'd work in Southampton, New York, teaching the wealthiest people in the United States their kids tennis. So that was kind of my summer job to pay for my college education. And although I was an atheist, God started to work on me and soften my heart some because I dreamed of being rich. I dreamed of getting a job on Wall Street. That's why I took that job in the Hamptons.
Right.
And but I was around these people, and I'd never seen a less happier group of people in my entire life. And they were absolutely the most wealthy and accomplished people I'd ever met. And I just couldn't put it together in my head, because I was sure if I had money, then I could make a difference. I could do something great. Money will allow me to have an impact. In my heart, it just wasn't wanting to be rich. I wanted to have an impact.
Right.
Yet I saw these people, what's to me was most important, it totally escaped them. So I started to question that some, and came back from my summer gig, and I was at the university, and I was at a tennis tournament, and there was a guy, one of the coaches reached out to me, and he said, "Hey, do you believe in God?" I said, "Well, no, I'm an atheist." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because, Christianity is for people who have nothing better to do with their lives." And he's like, "So what do you believe in?" I said, "Well, I'm I'm an electrical computer engineer. I believe in evolution. I'm basically, too smart for God." That's what. And he shared with me some apologetics, and he showed me an article that, for the life of me, I can't find it now. I don't know, maybe he made it up, but it worked on me. He basically said there was a story in the Bible when somebody prayed and the sun stopped for 24 hours. And I said, "Well, I don't believe that. That's ridiculous." Then he showed me some article that says that some scientists couldn't figure out why there's this hole in the space-time continuum of 24 hours. And I thought, whoa, okay, wait a minute. And it spooked me, to be honest. And I said, okay, wait a minute. If there is a God, then there's a heaven and there's a hell. And if there's a heaven and there's a hell, then I need to be really, really sure what I believe. I cannot wing this. I have to be certain.
Right.
So I went home. I was unnerved. I came back the next day to the tennis tournament, and I came up to him. I said, I think I believe in God. What do I need to do?
Oh, my gosh.
I'm afraid maybe I'm wrong. What if there is a God? And I was literally a little bit nervous. And he said, "Well, pray with me and tell God that you love him and you'll be saved." And I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's all you got to do." I said, "Are you sure?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. I was in a bar 2 nights ago, and I told half the women in there that I love them, but I don't remember them the next day. I mean, you're just telling me to say 3 words and all of a sudden it's all right.
Right.
You're telling me God would stop the sun, yet I'm just going to say 3 words,
right,
and it's all good." And I just couldn't wrap my brain around it. And we argued for like a half an hour. And then I said, "Thank you so much for helping me to believe in you, but I don't think you have it right. I just don't think I don't think you're right."
Wow.
And I went home, stopped by Walgreens, bought a Bible. And I decided I've got to figure this out. There's way too much at stake here. So I went home, opened the Bible, started reading Matthew chapter 1, the Father, the Father, the Father. And I looked at it, I thought, I have no idea what to do. So I closed the Bible and turned off my light, and I prayed. And I said, "God, if you're out there, help me find you." And it was like a 15-second prayer. But I really wanted him to hear that, if that was the case, if he existed. And 2 days later, Tuesday, I was walking from an engineering building to the cafeteria. It was like minus 15 degrees out. I had on my Letterman jacket and my headset. And I'm an introvert by nature, so I don't like to be bothered.
Right.
And this guy stops me. And he asked me to take off my headset. I take off my headset. He says, "I would like to invite you to a Bible talk." And that had never, ever in my life happened to me. I didn't know that existed. Wow. So I almost felt like this is the answer to my prayer on Sunday. God sent somebody to me.
Right.
And I was like, wow, Bible talk. So what's going to be there? And he said, this and that. And I was a little skeptical, but, he said there'd be food there too. So between the fact that I prayed and I was hungry, I agreed. And I came to Bible talk, and it absolutely blew me away. I mean, I couldn't believe the Bible was so alive and could answer real questions. Wow. Like I could never understand why my parents got a divorce. I could never understand why me and my girlfriend fight all the time. I could never understand that emptiness. I kept going after either professional tennis or a career or a job or Wall Street. And anytime I'd get success, it still felt empty. And that Bible talk, it was a Bible talk on building on the rock or the sand.
Wow.
And it just like scales fell from my eye. And the brother, Damon Pabst, who led the Bible talk, he was so vulnerable. And he said, immorality and pornography and this and that. And I couldn't believe he was saying these things.
Right.
And he said, sex outside of marriage is a sin. It's hurtful. It's harmful. It's not. And I had a girlfriend at the time. So, after the Bible talk, I went up to her. I said, look, I disagree with you about the whole immorality thing. I don't think it's a sin. And he said, well, what do you mean it's not a sin? I said, well, I love my girlfriend. I don't know why we can't be together. There's people who get married because somebody's rich or because someone's beautiful. They don't love each other. They're just using each other. Yet you say it's okay for them just because they have a piece of paper. I don't have a piece of paper, but I have real love.
Right.
And he said, okay, you really love her. And I said, absolutely. He said, you want to marry her? I said, absolutely. And he said, okay, what's a plane ticket cost to, she was in New York. He said, what's a plane ticket cost to New York? I said, about $400. He said, I'll write you a check right now. And you can fly tomorrow to New York and you can propose to her and you can get married. And I was like, dude, wait a minute. I'm not ready to get. And he's like, well, what do you mean you're not ready? You just said you're ready. If you're ready, do it. And I was like, well, I'm not exactly sure. And he said, well, look, if you had a daughter one day that a guy was going to sleep with her that didn't necessarily want to particularly be with her, would you approve of that? And I said, I'd kill him. he said, well, look in the mirror. He said, don't you see that that's who you are? And I was like, oh my gosh.
Wow.
And I was like, will you study the Bible with me? And he was like, sure. And I said, how much does that cost? And he said, it's free. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Because it's like not the best day of my life. So started studying the Bible. And it took about 2 months because I had a lot of doubts and a lot of questions, but mostly just to masquerade my desire to keep sinning. But God just really opened himself up to me. And I absolutely just fell in love with who God was. And it answered all the questions for my existence and everything. So I was so encouraged. I remember after the discipleship study, Mark Templer studied the Bible with me and Damon Pabst. And I came back after the discipleship study, and Mark said, so how are you feeling about this study? I said, oh my gosh, it's incredible. The world could be changed. This is amazing. And he said, that's great. And I said, I've decided, because I got the job on Wall Street. I got a job offer on Wall Street. And I said, I want to quit my job on Wall Street and I want to go in the ministry. And he's like, we didn't mention that in the discipleship. I didn't bring that up as a joke. He said, where's that coming from? And I said, do you have any idea? In 1 hour, you explained to me something that although I've been around Christianity my whole life, no one's ever explained that to me. I've never understood how simple it is to be right with God and what God's dream is for our lives. I said, if I could do what you did with me for the rest of my life with as many people as possible, that's what I want to do with my life. That's my dream, to change the world. Getting rich isn't the thing that can do it. It's this. It's what you just did with me. That's what I want to do.
Right.
So I was sold. Wow. After that. I wanted to spend my whole life telling that to other people.
That's
so
awesome.
That's kind of the conversion story.
And so you got baptized shortly after that?
Yeah, I got baptized January 10th, 1991. So I came to church like a week before Thanksgiving. Came home for Thanksgiving, actually cleaned up after myself. It almost put my mom in shock. She had no idea what happened to me.
Immediate household repentance. That's great.
Yeah, and I reached out to my girlfriend and we broke up. We kind of decided to do things right. She became a Christian 2 weeks later.
Oh, awesome.
My roommate persecuted me. He became a Christian 2 weeks later. Maurice Hook's football team studied the Bible, became a Christian. So altogether, 14 of my friends and classmates, the first 4 months I was a Christian, became Christians.
Oh my, 14 people?
Yeah, from the university, and relatives, and my younger brother became a Christian. It was a crazy time. I didn't really do any of the studies. I had the other, Damon and the other brothers were helping me study because I felt like I'd make a mistake and ruin their salvation forever. But eventually, after being in all those studies, I started to get the hang of it. But
now that's amazing. So, okay, let me just back up here a little bit. So are you from New York or are you from Kansas?
No, I'm from Kansas. I grew up in Overland Park, Kansas.
Okay, what's your connection to New York? Why were you going there to teach tennis?
So my dream was to work on Wall Street. Um, I was a tennis player, and during the summer, um, I would, a friend of mine landed this job in the Hamptons. And from that, he got invited to work for one of the big banks, investment banking in New York on Wall Street. So I told him, dude, if there's ever an opening in one of these clubs, could you please get me a job so I could get up there and meet the people that could get me onto Wall Street? My end
I
game was
see.
Wall Street.
I see. So it was really like a networking opportunity for you to
Right.
make connections.
Right.
That's great. That's smart. Wow. So
So
go ahead.
no, yeah. So that's how I got to New York. So the first 4 years I was a non-Christian in New York. Then the last year I went back there that summer as a Christian. And so that was an interesting story, but I ended up getting fired. Um,
A little too
just
zealous.
well, and because the biggest day for making money is Sunday, right? Because all the people take their helicopters out there to their homes in the Hamptons and they want to play on Saturday and Sunday. So to get Sunday off is an impossibility.
Got it.
So when I was studying the Bible, actually, when we were counting the cost, the question came up, how do you feel about coming to church? And I said, I wouldn't miss church over my dead body. And then he's like, well, how about summer, with your work? And I said, oh, well, I'll have to miss during the summer just because, Sunday's the biggest day. I can make $800 in a day. I mean, it's how I pay for my college. He's like, well, what do you think? Would Jesus go to church on Sunday? And I said, well, you're killing me. Of course Jesus would go. And he said, well, then what do you think you should do? And I said, well, doggone it, I need to go too then. And he's like, well, then maybe you should call your boss and tell him you need Sundays off. And I said, he's going to fire me. And he said, well, why don't you pray and trust God and see what he does? So I called my boss. I wasn't baptized yet. I called my boss, and I was the atheist on the club all those years before. I was the guy getting drunk.
Right.
And hung over the next day with dark glasses on, teaching kids tennis. And so I called my boss and I said, boss, I need Sunday off. And he's like, are you kidding me? Why? And I said, well, I want to go to church. He was like, you have got to be kidding me.
Oh my gosh.
He's like, I was waiting for 300 different answers, but I never thought you'd say the word church. And he said, forget it. No, if you need Sundays off, you're fired. And I said, okay, then I quit. And he said, are you serious? You're going to give up this job to go to church? And I said, well, and I'm thinking in my mind, I've lost my mind. Am I really going to say this?
Right.
And I said, yeah, if I can't have Sunday off, I can't take the job. And he said, call me back in a month. I'll let you know if you still have the job. And like a week later, I became a Christian. And then I called him back and I was already totally fired up. Whatever God decides is fine. So I called him back. I said, look, he said, so how do you feel? Do you still need Sundays off? And I said, yeah. And I said, it's a deal breaker for me. And he said, okay, well, then I'll give you a raise all the other days of the week to make up for the money you'll lose on Sunday. And I was like,
wow, that's amazing.
And I just felt like, God, unbelievable. I was in charge of all of his kids' clinics during the week.
Yeah.
So all the kids really liked me.
Yeah.
But on the weekends is when you teach the adults, and that's where you make the serious money.
Right.
So he felt like I was giving up a chance just to make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And he would let somebody else take that role, which is a very prestigious role. And I was willing just to take the pay cut and come work with the kids. So he gave me a raise. But then he fired me. We had a conversion in the Hamptons while I was up there. There was a girl who became a Christian, and then I got fired. Basically, he said, "Nope, you can't have Sundays off." And I said, "Okay, then I'm done."
Wow.
Packed my bags and went home.
So he changed his mind later.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. So it was kind of him. So
wow, that's fascinating. Now, okay, so from there, you became a Christian, you graduated, and then you went straight to Moscow. Tell me your path to the Moscow mission team.
Right. So actually, Moscow was planted summer of 91. I moved over there summer of 92. I went on the second wave. So Moscow had an incredible growth of like 800 people the first year. And they felt like the harvest was so ripe that instead of completely depleting Moscow of all of its leadership, they brought 10 more Americans over. to split them up between Kiev and St. Petersburg.
Okay.
So I went on that team. So yeah, I became a Christian in January. I actually went into the ministry in March. So when I was 2 months old as a Christian, they made me a part-time intern at the University of Kansas. Then I went to New York, ended up coming back, was a part-time campus minister with Steve Schmidt, awesome brother. I think he's in San Antonio right now. And but when I was home for Thanksgiving, I guess I was 10 months old in the Lord. I went out to LA for Thanksgiving just to spend some time with some brothers and to meet with a couple of the leaders in LA. But when I got out there, it turned out they had some things going on and they were very busy. And they gave me Kip's number and told me just to give him a call and tell him I'm in town. So I gave him a call and he said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I just came out to see some people, but it turns out it's not a good timing. And he remembered me, actually. I met him at the Jacob Javits Center when the Moscow church was sent out of New York. So I went up and introduced myself to him. And I think it kind of stuck out in his mind who I was because I was a tennis pro in the Hamptons and his boys had just started playing tennis. So I think there was an association with that. Mm-hmm. And I think he just has a really good memory too. So yes. He remembered me. And he said, so, what are you doing when you graduate? And I said, well, I think I'm going to move back to New York and go in the ministry because when I got fired, New York asked me to stay and just join the campus ministry there. But I decided to go back to Kansas, finish, and then go back to New York later. And he said, well, let's talk about that. And he invited me over the next day to help him do some Christmas shopping. And that's when they were looking for 10 Americans to go help support the planting of Novosibirsk, St. Petersburg, and Kiev. So God just orchestrated that I just happened to be in LA and happened to meet up with him as he was looking for 10 more Americans.
Wow.
So within 2 hours, he asked me if I would move to Kiev, Ukraine. And, I'm the worst person in geography and world history there ever was. I thought it was a chicken dish. I had no idea it was a country in a city. So I was like, and I think he saw the naivety and the excitement in my eyes. And he looked at me and he said, just so you know, this is for better, for worse, for sickness or health, until death do you part. And he said, this is not you can only go if you're going to lay down your life for the people over there. And this was right on the I'm sure Andy shared, right on the heels of when the original team in Moscow stayed after the coup. So we were the only group that stayed. So it's an all-in type thing because you're introducing Christianity for an entire nation,
right,
for an entire culture. It can't be because you want to just have another experience or something. So he tried to scare me, but I'd been praying every day since I was baptized that God would send me somewhere. So this was the answer to my prayer.
So did you say yes right on the spot?
I did, but then he told me to think about it and pray about it. So I thought about it, prayed about it, and then also looked up where is Kiev in an encyclopedia, just so I could say I knew where it was, just in case he was going to ask me any deeper questions.
Okay, so that summer, that spring you graduated, 92, from
so University of Kansas. I was invited over Thanksgiving to move, and then I graduated in May.
And
then I moved.
When did you fly out to? Did you go to Moscow, to Kiev, or?
So we went to LA, and of course this put a major tear in my family, just because my parents have no really religious background, and in the course of basically 6 months, I've gone from being an atheist to someone who's moving to the Soviet Union.
Oh my gosh! They must have just thought you're out of your mind.
Yeah. So my mom totally freaked out.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
She was, she took a nosedive after that. And then my dad hired people to deprogram me, basically, to kidnap me and carry me out into the forest and convince me that I've lost my mind.
Yeah.
Luckily, I figured that out and flew out of the state and hid.
Oh, you got alerted to it, apparently.
Yeah, I figured it out. So So yeah, so then launched. Yeah, we launched in May. We all went out to LA for 3 weeks. And my girlfriend, or the girl I was dating before I became a Christian, she was invited on the team as well. So the two of us were both on the team. And then the day before the team launched, she was asked to step off the team. So I was given a choice. I could stay home or I could go. But I had to make a choice. So I just trusted God that if it was meant to be, God would work it out. And if not, then I just need to go where God has opened the door for me to go. So that was challenging.
I bet it was.
I felt like I was stripped of everything. Basically, my mom couldn't look me in the eye or talk to me. My dad didn't want to talk to me. My older brother, who's not a Christian, thought I'd lost my mind. My younger brother was proud of me because he was a Christian. But it's the aroma of death or the fragrance. It's one or the other. You're either
Right.
people think you're insane and they don't have anything to do with you, or they think you're doing a great thing. So very polarized.
Oh my gosh, that must have been so raw emotionally.
It was. And when I'd landed there, it's like my mom's like, "So can you leave me the phone number where you'll be?" And I was like, "Well, no." And she's like, "Do you have your address?" And I said, "No." And there's no email, there's no internet,
Right.
And it was illegal. You couldn't call out of the Soviet Union to America. So I couldn't even call home if I wanted to. You have to order a call through Helsinki, and then they place it the next day.
Oh my gosh.
So I literally fell off the map.
Yeah.
So, I feel for my parents. That was quite an initiation into the kingdom.
Exactly. Oh boy. Talk about whiplash. That would be challenging. So let's talk a little bit about that first year in Kiev or in Russia, wherever you're at. What was the experience like coming from the States?
Well, and things have changed a lot, obviously, in Russia and the Ukraine the last 20 some years. But it was very, very different. I mean, it was crazy different. And, lots of things in every facet. It was different. The actual church planting was different from what I was expecting. The loneliness that settles in when you can't talk to people.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
But every challenge has its blessing, right? So the loneliness forced me to talk to God way much more than I had the tendency to do before. Where before I could just pick up a phone and talk to anybody in the States that I know could help me. But when you're out there on the mission field and you can't speak to the people you're converting, I mean, maybe 5% speak English. So you go for a walk with a brother and you just kind of walk silently by each other. I mean, you use the 20 words and then you just walk next to them. And they'd pray in Russian. I don't understand a word they're saying. I pray in English. They don't understand a word I'm saying. We hug each other and we go home. And it's,
oh my gosh,
you trust that God is working, but I think I became, it was challenging. And, a third of the team, didn't make it. They lost their way.
You're talking about the Americans that came on the team?
Right. Yeah.
During that time, or they left later?
A couple during that time. But yeah, it takes a toll. I really like that in your book. You have to you got to find that connection with God. But God blessed me. I was incredibly humbled when we planted. So I flew over, and there was a St. Petersburg team and a Kiev team. And I was on the St. Petersburg team. And the St. Petersburg team went with the Kiev team to plant Kiev so that the St. Petersburg team could get some experience. Then St. Petersburg came back and then planted St. Petersburg.
Okay.
But when I went to Kiev, God humbled me in a mighty way. I mean, I was so arrogant and so worried about myself. And what do I look like? And will I have visitors? And will I have studies? And I mean, I was so full of myself. There was no space for the 4 million lost people in the Ukraine. It was just all about me. It was just, it was incredible because the first 3 weeks, there were 77 people baptized in the Kiev church.
Oh, okay. Wait a second. Say that again.
In the first 3 weeks, there were 77 people baptized.
In the first 3 weeks of the Kiev planting, 77 people baptized.
Yeah, 28 the first Sunday. After the first Sunday service, the next Sunday, 28 people were baptized.
Oh
and
my
then
gosh.
And then by the end of the 3 weeks, the end of the month, basically, because we started June 6th, by the end of June, it was at 77. Which sounds like incredibly open, but I did the math, and it kind of pans out to being very similar to today, just in the sense, if you have a team of 30 people inviting 1,000 people a week, that's 30,000 invitations. About 28 people became Christians out of the 30,000 invitations, which basically means, we invited about 1,000 people to find one open soul.
Wow.
And then we did that for 3 weeks. So, I just think, the harvest is still plentiful. I just think the amount of dedication and devotion to massively sharing our faith, that was a unique, that's something that I think, I think God worked through that. But interesting enough, out of the 77 baptisms the first 3 weeks, I was the only guy on the team who didn't help anybody become a Christian. Dude, I thought, okay, the Spirit left me. I fell away. Can I get restored?
Must be Achan sin somewhere in there.
Totally. Oh my gosh. Well, and I know what the sin was. I was the most arrogant, haughty. Oh gosh.
Oh my gosh.
That was a brutal time.
Well,
so I left Kiev, and only after I left Kiev did somebody who I invited actually get baptized, but only after I left.
Oh gosh.
Then I went to St. Petersburg with Derek Vett, and I was literally nervous before the first service. And I said, Derek, I'm just afraid God won't work through me again. I'm just so afraid. And he grabbed my hands and he got down on his knees and we prayed together. And I just prayed to be an empty vessel and humble, and, God blessed. And in St. Petersburg, we had tons of people become Christians. Basically 4 or 5 guys I helped become Christians in the first month. And then we started a campus ministry together, the 5 of us. And the church, or the campus, the South Campus ministry grew from 5 to 120 by the end of January. So.
Oh my gosh. So, okay. And how long was that? When did you plan it?
Kind of the first week of August.
Okay.
So August, September, October, November, December.
So in like 4 months, it grew from 5 people to
5
120.
months, basically.
That's just the campus ministry?
It was just campus, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
I was personally leading 10 Bible talks, so I don't actually recommend anybody imitating my life.
10 Bible talks.
There was one time when Derek Vett said, hey, could you sit in my living room just for a moment? And then he walked out, locked the door, and left me in there for 5 hours. He said, dude, you're going to rest. I've had it with your schedule. I'm not letting you out of here until you take a nap.
Oh gosh, you were so driven. Just, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Now,
go ahead.
Was this when you met Elena? How did you meet Elena?
Yes. So I met her during a date when I first arrived in Moscow. But the first time we started to kind of, like, I invited her on a date, it was in like March 92. No. Yeah, 93. So I'd basically been in the former Soviet Union for about 7 months at that point. And basically, Andy, they had dreams to plant more churches. So there was a church in Novosibirsk, St. Petersburg, and Kiev, but we wanted all 4 of those churches to plant another church the next year. So all of us missionaries were targeted for another church, which I think is important in building, because when I went to St. Petersburg, I clearly understood from day one, I'm not staying. So from day one, I was looking at who I'm going to raise up to take my spot. Mm-hmm. And I built always, Andy trained us to always build trying to replace yourself. Mm-hmm. What does this ministry look like next week without me? Yeah. And don't build yourself into your ministry. Build yourself out of your ministry. That's how we multiply. That's how we empower people to have their own dreams. So even if you don't end up going, I think that was really, really wise. But we were planning on leaving. So basically, I was told I was going to plant the church in Minsk, Belarus. But then some things happened, some things changed, and the leader of Kiev was going to move to America to get ready to go plant the church in Budapest, Tomi Kukta. So they wanted to find someone that would actually go and lead Kiev. And at that time, Andy and Tammy asked me, "So Shawn, who do you like?" And I was like, "Well, who likes me? I'm afraid to risk. I'm afraid to risk it." I'm like, and Tammy and Andy very gently said, "Dude, could you have a conviction about something? Like, what is it you want out of life? Quit waiting for someone to tell you what you think is." So that was good. And I thought, okay, that's right. I need to have a conviction about who I like and who I want to build a relationship with. So I go back to the office in Moscow before I go back to St. Petersburg. And I was talking to a brother. I said, "So bro, who do you like?" And he says, "Oh man, I really like Lena. She's awesome." And I said, "Yeah, tell me why you like Lena." He said, "She's spiritual and she's smart and she's a law student and she's sporty and athletic and she's funny and she's kind and she wants to do great things for God." Like, he listed everything I was dreaming of. I said, "That's the one." That's the one. I didn't tell him. Thank you for telling me who I should. So, but immediately I went back to St. Petersburg. I got her number and I said, "I'm going to take this girl out for a date. This is going to be perfect." So I called her and she spoke almost no English. I mutilated the Russian language. But I asked her out on a date, and we went on a date. And then came back 2 months later to go on a second date. But when I came back 2 months later to go on the second date, that's when they decided to speed up the plan. And when I came into town, they said, "Shawn, actually, the original plan was that I moved to Moscow, work with Andy for 3 months. Then they send me to Kiev. But they said, we need to speed things up. Tomi needs to go to Budapest earlier. So we actually want to ask you not to go back and get your stuff in St. Petersburg. Just go to the store and buy some T-shirts and underwear and jeans. If you could leave tomorrow for Kiev to start leading the church." And I was like, oh my gosh. I said, "And with who?" And Andy said, "Well, let's see how your second date goes with Lynn. If it goes well, maybe you can go with her."
Oh, this needs to be this needs to be a TV show. This really does. This is awesome.
So he's like, "So how do you feel about Lynn?" I said, "Oh, dude, she's perfect for me. I love her. She's awesome." And he said, "Well, then maybe she should go with you to Kiev." And he's like, "Well, if you're sure, why don't you go and ask her to be your girlfriend?" And I was like, "Okay, awesome." Perfect. I think Andy was a little concerned, for us to be down there, not dating and trying to lead the church. And,
right.
I think he was trying to, also protect purity, because sure. I didn't realize it at the time, but Andy's like, "Dude, purity, 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 purity." He's like, "You guys have got to be careful." Yeah. And I'm not real careful. Just, I can be, sometimes we joke that my wife has a conscience for the two of us.
Right.
But I'm really thankful that we had a pure relationship. And because, looking back at it, and we fast tracked it. I mean, we were dating. After 3 months, we were engaged. After 3 months, we were going to get married. But then we stopped it, broke off the engagement, and delayed it for a few months, and ended up getting married a year after we started dating. It wasn't a purity issue at all. It was a stress in managing our relationship while trying to lead the church.
Right. So
we took a break and slowed it down, which at the time I didn't understand, but now looking back, it's like God intervened.
Wow.
Just to help us have a stronger foundation before we started. But if you mess up the purity and you're the young church leader and all those young kids are looking at you, you've damaged things for years to come.
Absolutely. And, oh my gosh.
So
absolutely.
God protected us. God's awesome.
Okay. So let me clarify. So you went on one date, you liked her, and then you're going on the second date. And that's when Andy said, "Well, why don't the second time just ask her to go steady?"
Yeah. That's what happened.
Sounds very simple. And so then,
it is.
So you guys went steady, and then she went with you to Kiev.
Yeah, actually, our next date, because I jumped on a train that night to go to Kiev, our next date was in Kiev 2 days later, and that's when we started dating.
Oh my!
So it was on our second date we started dating.
That's
And you
That's
have to understand that date
unbelievable.
was based on almost no Russian and almost no English.
Lots of
It was, did you say
meaningful looks
Jesus
and
is
smile.
Lord? That's good enough for me. I'm good to go.
Wow, that's an incredible story.
I
Now,
don't recommend that for everybody,
okay,
but
so now you've got how many kids? How many kids do you have?
two.
You've got two.
Yeah. So Andrew's 20, he'll be 24 this year, and our daughter Diana is 18. So
Andrew
yeah.
and Deanna.
Uh-huh. We
Oh,
call her Gunya, but her name's Diana.
wow. So they're almost out of the house here. At least,
My son's out of the house. He finished university, and he's actually quarantined in Moscow right now, working for his company.
wow.
So he's fine. He's doing well. And Diana's in the room next door, studying at university,
Okay.
also quarantined. So
So she's going to school there in Ukraine.
in Kiev, yeah.
Freshman, sophomore, something like that.
Freshman.
Okay, that's great. Now,
Yeah.
Shawn, here's the thing that really stands out to me about you is in 2003 there was a major restructuring in our family of churches. Funding got cut dramatically. So many people came back. So many foreign missionaries, and yet you stayed. I mean, you've been overseas since the time you're talking about there. Why didn't you come back? What happened? How are you the one that's still going?
Good question. Well, I think, of course, God has been the biggest support and encouragement. I think my wife, she's like my compass. I think that probably, and at the time, in 2003, I was actually working for Hope Worldwide. We were always doing ministry, leading a super region or leading a church, or, we were always planting churches or leading ministries. But at that moment, I was working for Hope in Moscow. And when 2003 hit, Hope Worldwide took a big hit. And several of the GHLs, that was kind of like the world sector leader equivalent of a Hope coordinator. I was working with Marty and Chris Fuquay for the Northern Federation for Hope. But at this moment, the Gimpels were also looking to replace themselves. And they wanted me and Lena to step into their role of leading Hope. And in the meantime, they kind of promoted us to kind of like their VP. And when 2003 hit, what we did is me and Lena and our two kids came to America and got in a minivan and hit church to church to church to church to church to try and explain why they should not quit funding Hope. What we do is we go to a city for 3 days. My wife would cook a Russian meal with borscht and everything to try and warm the hearts, because there was a lot of mistrust at the time.
Sure.
And I would answer every question from Alpha to Omega about Hope. And I'm living at that moment, in the former Soviet Union, which, gives me some credibility that I'm not in this for me, obviously.
Right.
I'm trying to take care of the orphans that are going to bed crying in my arms every night. Can you throw us a bone? I got elderly people starving.
Right.
Please don't stop.
Right.
And so we'd spend 3 days in a city, pack up our car, and go to the next city. And we did that for 6 months. We went from one side of the U.S. to the other and visited almost 100 churches. Thanks to that, I was able to meet almost everybody in our movement.
Right.
And I've been in the homes of almost everybody. So we have a lot of dear, great memories from all that. But so that was 2003 to 2005, pretty much trying to hold on to Hope. And we were kind of being pushed to come to the States, or encouraged is probably a better word, to come to the States and start to lead Hope. But it never sat right with us. I was going through a really bad time spiritually in 2005 in Moscow. We were kind of a little bit sidelined, and we kind of stopped serving in the church. We were asked not to really, we weren't leading a sector. We weren't leading a family. We actually weren't even leading a small group. And that lasted for about a year, and I started to lose hope and get discouraged. And my wife always felt like we can't leave here because there's so few leadership in this part of the world. And when you go to America, there's so much leadership.
Right.
you visit LA or you visit New York or some of these churches that have thousands, and they say we really have big needs, and you realize they do have needs, but
Right.
compared to a continent,
Right.
you you can't even compare the level of spirituality and the resources that are available. So, and this is a little off topic, but I think it's important as I kind of think about what you would want me to share. I think one of the reasons I stayed out there is because we got to have people that go out there and stay.
Right.
You got to stay. It's a life work.
Right.
It's not something you come in for 4 years and do it and it is just going to go.
Right.
And I think there was a great brother. I'm blanking his name. Dr. Gumley, who's in Australia.
Graham Gumley.
Graham Gumley. And he was in Cambodia. And one of the times we visited Cambodia, and he's this famous hand surgeon,
right,
who's in this hospital in Cambodia. And I'm like, Graham, what motivates you to stay here? I mean,
right.
Explain that to me. And he said, well, I can do an operation in the United States and save someone's life. And it feels really good to use your gifts to save someone's life. But I realized if I didn't come to work that day, there's 5 other doctors that could have done that exact same operation and saved that person's life. But he said in Cambodia, if I don't show up, that person dies. And he said, you can count the amount of doctors that can do what I can do on one hand for this entire country. And I could be replaced in the hospital by 20 people that can do what I can do. Maybe I'm a little better than them, but still. And I think that contrast always kind of stayed in my head after that. I mean, Eastern Europe's a group of 21 countries, like 0 elders. In most of these countries, less than 30 or 40 Christians for an entire country.
Right.
6 of the countries, no church at all. And I'm sure we could be used in a great way in America. And I'm sure we could be helpful. I'm sure of that. But on the backdrop of the despair and poverty in the desert of some of these nations, and we just feel like we have 24 years of experience of this mentality, this culture, where it just takes years to learn some of these things. We just feel like this is the place God can best use us. It doesn't mean we need to stay here.
Right.
I mean, you can look at Peter and Paul and argue that Paul would be better for the Jews and Peter better for the Gentiles, and God flipped it. So I'm not saying not everything has to be logical, but we just felt like we should stay as long as it's possible.
Right. That's flat out inspiring. Totally inspiring. Now, let me double back on something you mentioned. You went on this massive road trip, which just sounds like so much fun. And I'm sure it was fun mixed with a little bit of kind of craziness. But you met everybody. And I think that's one thing that really stands out to me about you, Shawn, is that you are probably the most well-known person in the kingdom of God. I mean, you've spoken to so many different teen groups and youth groups all over. You're a connector. I mean, even when you're sharing about going to the Hamptons to make connections with, high net worth individuals, this is like your gift set. And I'm sure it must have benefited you. I know that you do a lot of fundraising. You did it for Hope, and then you're doing it for a current project you're doing for Eastern Europe that we're going to talk about. How important is it for you? And for a person who's a young achiever and he's really trying to crank and really grow, how important is it to build relationships? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'm probably to a fault dependent on relationships. I think those couple years when I couldn't really have close relationships helped me get closer to God, for sure. I think that was an important step in the big picture. But relationships, I get a lot from them. I mean, from my coach, from my tennis days, I find them invaluable. I feel like there's just so much to learn from different brothers and sisters. Every brother and sister is like this miraculous story, right? And then everyone who's serving in the ministry has learned so many things.
Right.
And I also believe God has a special plan for everybody, right? Like, 1 Peter 4, God's given everyone gifts to be used to build up his kingdom. So, any relationship God gives me, I just believe there's something that can happen with that relationship that could cause something impossible to happen.
Right.
whether that person could become a Christian or whether me and them can do something together to do something awesome for God. And, so I think that's a plus. I'd say the minus side with me, on the other hand, is that there's so many and I don't do well maintaining expectations. And I think, I think I don't manage that well. I think I let people down. I think that's one of my weaknesses. I think even you've experienced a little of that, trying to get a hold of me to get this call set up. I probably wasn't the easiest person to get this thing set up with. I don't know.
Well, I understand you're busy, and I think the thing that impresses me here is that you are a connector, and even though you are in Kiev, Ukraine, and you said yourself, a lot of Americans don't even know where that is, or the only time they hear about it is recent scandals in Ukraine. But still, you've been able to maintain great relationships, which is a credit to your desire to stay connected. I mean, you could have easily just dropped off, disappeared, and been the whatever happened to Shawn Wooten from '92 or something like that. But it's not that way. And I think a lot of leaders, small group leaders, people in small churches, young leaders, campus leaders, they're so focused on themselves that they're not thinking about, hey, I need the strength of other people around me. And I think that's just massive. I know for myself, I can totally go in that direction where I'm not connected to people. I'm just doing my own thing. And I think that's a great quality and something that you bring to the table. And I'm sure it is hard to keep track of everybody, but it's definitely something that stands out and I think needs to be noted. Tell me a little bit about this struggle in 2005. How'd you come back from it? A lot of people, we all go through major struggles in our lives, and there's people listening that are feeling like, I've been sidelined. I used to be awesome. I used to be super strong. I used to be on fire. Now I'm not believed in. I'm on the bench, or I'm in the stands. I'm not on the floor. How'd you get back on your feet, and what'd you learn from that?
Well, I had a couple of great friends.
There you go again. Relationships.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think you're right, bro. I think relationships are just so important. And I had 3 buddies in Moscow, and these are people actually appointed, and then they stayed in their roles, and then I was in their region, but really not allowed to lead anything.
Don't touch anything.
But they would get with me every week, and they would just encourage me and love up on me. And so they were a huge help. And then my wife was awesome. She was like, she kept believing in us and me. And then I just did the best with what I could. Right. So we worked with Hope, and did the best we could with Hope, and Hope flourished. We came up with a lot of great programs. I got a reward from Putin's wife, and all kinds of different things happened. Got to meet Michael Jackson.
Wow.
My wife was called into the mayor of Moscow for one of his sessions. So there's lots of great things that happen in Hope. There's no reason to look at something and think, why can't I do that? Why don't I just do what's right in front of me? Let's just focus on this then. And if God wants to open up that door later, he will. So I think that was the thing. So we finally started to lead a small group, and then that small group turned into a sector. So I just think God will teach us something no matter where we're at.
Right.
And there's always good that comes out of it. I remember, I think that moment kind of really strengthened our marriage, just because we were always so busy. We never really had time just for each other.
Right.
We started dating, leading the Kiev church, and it was 200. We got married when the church was 700. So from our wedding day, the church is 700, and we led it up to 1,600 in the next year. And then we moved to Moscow to take on a super region of 1,000 and start Hope Worldwide for the former Soviet Union. And me and Lena were just always running 3,000 miles an hour. We just never stopped and sat at each other's feet and said, so how are you doing?
Wow.
I mean, it was just so fast. And I think
Right.
God slammed on the brakes, and maybe the situation didn't seem righteous to me, but he always uses it for the good. Oh my gosh. I've always looked back at moments where I felt like that wasn't fair, quote unquote fair, although God forbid we ever get fair. You know, and he always works for the good.
That's great. Well, let's talk a little bit about this whole, you just talked about God slamming on the brakes. And I think that there's times when people feel like, I'm in the doghouse, or, God's mad at me or something like that. And it almost, I've noticed at times life is so long, God is on his own timetable. And I think sometimes we can make the wrong deduction about what's happening in our lives and feel like I've been, put off, taken off the team or something like that, when in fact, God is doing something inside of us. I think about like Joseph, being sold into slavery or going into the prison. And for him, it must have been a real test. Like, what did I do wrong? And in fact, God was doing something to make him stronger. And so I think that's very, very powerful for people listening and for all of us, just to go, okay, hey, I may not see it or feel it, but God is doing something, and I'm going to come out of here more productive. And I think that's what's so impressive, Shawn, is that you had a time of struggle, but look at what you're doing now. You are bearing even more fruit. Any thoughts on that?
No, well, I think you're absolutely right. I think he always has good intentions for us, and any kind of resistance or suffering just helps us to be more like Christ and have more compassion for people who suffer in similar ways. So I absolutely think that's true. I had my dad just pass in December, and when you lose people, you can become discouraged. And when I lost my mom, also, I basically 5 months after I moved to St. Petersburg, that's when my mom passed away. So I couldn't get back in time. I couldn't get out of the Soviet Union to get back in time. And she died like 2 seconds before the new year. And it was like, there's sometimes when you have these questions, and what I've decided with my life is that I have to be able to explain every event in my life that it was for my good and that it was an expression of love. And I'll wrestle in prayer until I get there, because I refuse to accept that God's not loving me always. And that even if he's disciplining me, it's absolutely in love with this great vision and dream for me on the other side.
Right.
So I think that optimism, or that hopefulness that it's always working out for the good. I think there's just been so many crazy things that have happened in my life that, from Chernobyl to the mafia to the KGB to everything that's gone on. And every time I look back, the stories I would ever sit down and tell you about that I think are most helpful are all the ones where I felt like my life is literally unraveling and nothing's going the way it's supposed to. And, the Bible is filled with a lot of those stories too. So I just think we just have to know how to hold on to God at that moment.
That's true. The power of perseverance and patience is so valuable. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
And I've always heavily relied on fasting as well. When things get really tough, I fast because I don't know how else to deal with the pressure. I want to know that God is definitely invoking his power. In some situations, kind of only get driven out by prayer and fasting. So when we had the coup 4 years ago and the war, and it looked like Russia and Ukraine were going to hate each other, and my wife's Russian, I'm living in Ukraine, I'm trying to keep all this work unified. I mean, it was unbearable. Our kids couldn't go to school because of sniper attack, and the police was gone, and there's that chaos. And I think I fasted that year almost half the days. I mean, I fasted like 130 or 140 days that year. A 40-day fast, a 30-day fast, every month, 10 days. sometimes 2 or 3 days, almost every week.
Oh my gosh. How did you
Just
do a
because,
40-day fast?
well, I have coffee
Okay.
with milk,
That's zero
no
calories, energy,
no
no
sugar.
calories.
Cappuccinos was my diet, basically cappuccinos, but no sugar. Um, I used to try and do water fast, but then you just lay in your bed and you can't do anything for the Lord anyways. But
Right.
it's like keto teaches. Once you get over to the 3 day hump and the 10 day hump, you just start burning fat and you have lots of energy. And luckily, I had much fat to burn, so I guess it all
How
worked
much?
out.
Okay. I know this is not a spiritual question, but how much weight did you lose after a 40-day fast?
I went from about 96 kilos down to like 83. So that's about 13 kilos.
About 30
So
pounds.
26, about 30 pounds.
Wow.
So, but it's tough, but it's one of the greatest, it's some of the greatest memories I have as a Christian because temptation literally flees.
Hmm.
Um, Lust, laziness, um, it just flees because if you can say no to food, which is such a primal instinct and desire,
Mhm.
once you it's a special time. I mean, it is. You have so much free time because you're not cooking and eating, and you know.
Your wife must have loved it. No cooking.
Yeah, yeah. First three
Wow.
days are always hard, but after 3 days, it gets easier.
Okay. So, well, let's just take a little detour on that one. I'm sure there are people listening going, I'd like to fast. That's 40 days seems crazy. 30 days.
Yeah,
What would be baby steps? Like what would a person thinking, yeah, I want to fast. I'd like to have a meaningful fast. What three things could you tell them to do?
um, I think. I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I mean, I don't
Sure.
know who it is I'm talking to. Maybe you want to talk to a doctor, but I think the first day's hard. The second day's harder. By day three, it gets easier.
Hmm.
Once you get over day three, it kind of goes away until like day seven.
Hmm.
And then you're a little bit hungry. But then by day 10, you literally are not hungry. Um, I played the number 8 Ukrainian tennis player in the country on my like 15th day of fasting, and I beat him when I hadn't played in like a couple of years. uh, I just think the Lord, you're walking in his presence. You have strength. You have
Wow.
spiritual strength.
Wow.
But I like 10 days. The entire time I led the Kiev church for that year and a half I led the Kiev church, I would fast 10 days a month. That was just standard.
Wow.
So every month, 10 days, I would fast for God to grow the church so that no one would fall away, that tons of people would become Christians. I just begged God. And the whole staff would most of the time fast with me. So I just think we cried out to God like in just a crazy way.
That's inspiring. That is totally awesome. 10 days
We
a month.
really didn't know what we were doing, but we were incredibly zealous.
Now this is back in the early 90s when you were called down there and you just met Elena and everything. Okay. So
Right, 93,
so tell me, what have you seen? I mean, what fruit has that produced? Like what have you seen that you said you felt like you're walking with Christ, temptation flees, any other benefits of fasting that you could encourage somebody with? Any miracles you've
Well, I
seen
just
as a
think,
result of that?
oh, well, yeah, there's a ton of miracles that God did. I think if I talk about the conviction and the foundation, sometimes I don't understand what God is doing. And I love the moment when Jesus said, "This can only like if it's really stuck, like if the I don't know, Satan's got his claws in there or whatever, the demon's really holding on to whatever it is." Jesus reassures us that it can come out if we pray and fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I really pray and fast about something, then I can really trust that this result is definitely God's will. I can trust this. It may not be what I want, but I can trust that God is definitely working for the good. And I feel like if I just pray about it, but I don't fast, just from my mind and my convictions and my heart, I feel like, did I put it all out there? And I don't think it has to be 10 days or 40 days.
Right.
But I'll take a day to fast if it's anything significant. If I feel like we're stuck, if we're stuck with anything, if there's a brother who I love who's stuck, if the government is stuck, if Chernobyl's on fire, whatever's going on, okay, I'm going to pray and fast for this to get knocked out.
That's a great go-to, because we're always getting stuck. I mean, I wish that weren't the case, but it's just the truth in our ministries. And I'm sure people listening have experienced that, where they feel stuck in their marriage, or they feel their ministry stuck, or they feel like I'm stuck in my job, or, there's so many sticking points that what you're saying is that's your go-to. That's your first thing. Right. Is I'm going to pray and fast about this and ask God to get us past this point. So that's right. That's very powerful. Okay. So let's go ahead and go back to your timeline. You were in Moscow in 2005. How'd you get to Ukraine? Like what path did you take to get where you're at now?
So basically we agreed to take the job in Philly and come to Philadelphia and start to lead Hope. We agreed to do that. We were going to move a year later in like 2006. At that moment, Kip was, and we were in Moscow at the moment. At that moment, Kip was trying to plant his church in Kiev. And he tried to get people, rattle people, because, Kip preached Kip was on the church planting to Kiev. Right. So he's always visited the Kiev church. And, I think he decided that was going to be one of the first it was the first international church he went after. When I heard that, I thought, me and Lena should go down to Kiev and protect the church. So I called him and I said, I'm coming to Kiev to, I don't believe what's going on is righteous or good or builds faith. So, I was prayerful and I thought, okay, well, we'll go to Kiev for a year before we move to America. And that kind of helps us uproot and make the move easier. But once we moved to Kiev, at that moment, there was a situation in an orphanage in Romania with Hope. And I had to go there, and for whatever reason, we needed to shut it down. And then I was asked to go to Boston to meet up with Valder Koha to explain what happened, and because he was one of the people who helped finance that orphanage. Big heart for the orphans there in Romania. So I flew to Boston and we started to spend time together. And, and I think it was a kind of a challenging time for him because of all the chaos. And I just sat with him. I said, wow, God's given you so many gifts. There's just so much you could do to strengthen the kingdom. Don't get down. And then he turned around and started asking me the same questions. He's like, dude, don't you get down. I mean, what?
Right.
So then I went to church the next day and he had never heard me speak. And I preached on Sunday. And then we left church and he's like, I don't understand. And I said, what don't you understand? He said, I don't understand if you have that faith story and you've done this in this former Soviet Union, build churches like this, why would you go to Hope right now? Why would you leave?
Right.
And I said, well, it's been very challenging and this and that. And he's like, dude, I think you might be burying some of your talents if you do that. He said, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but are you sure that that's the right thing to do?
Right. He saw your gift for preaching and your experience, and he said, hey, that's hope. Right. Hope is a good thing, but it may not be your primary calling. It's something you can do on the side while you do your primary vocation.
Right. That was his question. Yeah. So about a month later, things kind of were, falling apart everywhere. And he and Dave Malutnok circled back to me and said, would you be interested in taking a job and helping strengthen the churches in Europe? Because basically most of the missionaries had all gone home and we were already on the mission field. So could we help? Could we engage? So, we prayed and fasted about it and we decided we should go back into the ministry. So this was 2005 when, Boston had just let go like 90% of their staff. I mean, it was a very tough time kingdom-wide. Everyone was still getting let go.
Right.
And we went back into the ministry.
Wow.
And I remember going to the Gimpels to tell them that we were going to switch jobs. And God bless Pat. She has such a great heart for God's kingdom. I said to him, basically, I'm thinking, the Wootens probably won't come to Philly. I think we're going to go back into the ministry. And Pat's like, so where would you go into the ministry? And I said, well, I think Europe, which was just decimated. I mean, everyone was just fired.
Right.
And we'd be supported by Boston, where they were just firing everybody, basically. And she's like, have you thought this through?
Right.
My guess is that a year from now, you'll be out of a job. And I said, well, Pat, even if it's just for one more year, God asked me to serve full time. And then a year from now, I'm out of a job. I'll know for sure I used my life the most sold out way I possibly could for God for the last 365 days. No regrets. And, Pat's like, I agree. I mean, as much as she wanted us to come to Hope, she has a heart for God's kingdom and for saving souls. I mean, she's always been an inspiration to me. Hope for her was not just a charity; it was saving souls always. Yeah. So that's kind of how that happened. That's how we. So we took the job.
You've been there since 2006.
Yeah. So we moved to Kiev 2006 to, with one intention, but we ended up staying. And for the first few years, we just focused on Europe and traveled a lot. But then eventually we kind of settled down in Kiev to help the Kiev church.
Okay.
And then two years ago, we moved out of any kind of leadership role in the Kiev church, and we're focused now on the Eastern European churches.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that, Eastern Europe. You're going to have to help us with Eastern Europe geography. What countries are we talking about? How many churches are there? You touched a little bit about it. 21 countries in Eastern Europe, 6 countries with no churches. But how many disciples are there now? If you can share some highlights, some challenges that you're facing, if you could just kind of give kind of the broad picture here of what we're talking about your work in Eastern Europe.
Okay. So Eastern Europe, at least the way we define it, obviously, I'm not sure Google would agree with everything I'm about to say, but it's the Ukraine. We consider to be part of Eastern Europe. Obviously, geography, Eastern Europe includes part of Russia, but it's basically just the Ukraine, Moldova, and then you have Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Slovenia, all the Yugoslavian countries down there, Tirana, or Albania, Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, the Baltics, that's Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. We work with them as well. Croatia, Serbia. So all those countries down in that area.
So it's just a vast area. I mean, you're going up down into Turkey. That's
99% Muslim.
Wow.
It's pretty different.
Oh my gosh. So how many churches are we talking?
So that's 270 million people. It's 21 different fellowships. Every single country has its own language. And it's not like a European Union situation where they all kind of have an open border. They all have their own rules. 6 of the countries are in the EU, but the rest of the countries are not in the EU. So it's all kind of mixed up. It's some of the most corrupt places. It's post-Soviet. So there is some cultural similarities. The Muslim states are Turkey and Albania and Kosovo. The rest is, then you have your strong Catholic groups like Poland. And then you just have a lot of atheism and agnosticism. So it's very diverse, very challenging. No middle class in most of these countries. You're either kind of poor or you're corruptedly wealthy.
Wow.
Great-hearted Christians, hospitality, off the chart hospitality. They may not have anything, but they'll put everything on the table and feed you and love you. And so in beautiful part of the world, right? Most of the biblical land is in this part of the world.
Right. Okay. So how many disciples are we talking there?
About 3,200, I think, is the number.
Okay. concentrated mostly in like Kiev. Those are like the large churches, Kiev and
yeah, Kiev is the big church. The number 2 church would be Odessa. That's the second largest church.
Okay, and how many disciples now are there in Kiev?
In Kiev, about 1,700.
Oh my gosh, what a big church! And you're not leading that church; you're just living there.
Right. Yeah. 4 years ago, we appointed an eldership. Praise God. And then 2 years ago, handed off to a new lead evangelist, and he's got his team of evangelists, and he works with the elders, and they're doing a great job leading the Kiev church.
Okay, now that's a Ukrainian national that's leading that?
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
And all the elders are Ukrainians, so it's a completely homegrown, home converted, home raised up leadership team of a church of 1,700. So that's encouraging.
And how many people in Odessa?
300, about 320.
Okay. So, Shawn, you've got a new growth initiative for Eastern Europe. And tell me about why, what's the reason for this, and just explain what you're doing.
Okay. So, it's interesting. When we planted churches in the beginning of our fellowship, there was a lot of effort that went into planting those churches. I talked with Scott and Lynn Green about how they planted Hong Kong, that they chose the team a year ahead of time. That team was together in Boston building dynamics. And then that team launched together, and it's a team, right? It's like 8, 10, 12 people. The Moscow church was planted with 12, 14 people. The Kiev church was planted with 12 people. St. Petersburg, 12 people. And Johannesburg was planted with a large team. The first churches in India. And those cities, Andy Fleming did the statistical research that the cities that had strong, large plantings, they're the ones that broke through that certain level and are able to have that ongoing momentum to plant churches and send out churches and continue to evangelize their countries. I think the year 2000 plan, or the 6-year plan that we had to get churches in all the countries, was incredibly visionary and necessary, so that we didn't become self-focused on just where we were, but kept having a vision to get to all the nations.
Right.
But I think we became a slave to the timeline, and I don't think we had the resources to plant the quality that we did in the beginning. So as you went into some of these smaller countries in Eastern Europe, as if I were to quiz probably people listening to this, list all the countries that are in Eastern Europe, that's hard to do.
Right.
So also attracting a team to Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Paris is one thing.
Right.
Attracting a team to Pristina, Montenegro is a different thing. And I think we sent teams that were smaller, maybe 4 people, 6 people. They weren't well-trained church leaders. They were good-hearted family group leaders who had a dream to be a part of this 6-year plan. So I think all the intentions and all the hearts were noble, but we didn't count the cost well. So these churches weren't planted with a critical mass of faith and evangelism to get that church up and growing. And I think it's very important, and that's why I love your book so much, 0 to 100. And anyone listening to this, you should always read Rob's book on 0 to 100. It's fantastic. I think you have to get up to 100 in a short period of time, because it's building your genetic code of how you view church growth. If it takes forever and people don't see growth happening, then you just assume that's the way it is.
Right.
And the interesting thing, people we converted in Kiev, St. Petersburg, and Moscow in that first year, they're used to seeing baptisms every day. They had never seen a church without baptisms for every day. So when they go out and share their faith, they just expect it to happen. Although we were still sharing our faith 1,000 times for everyone who came and became a Christian.
Right.
It's not like people were falling into the baptistry. But everyone was just sharing. The average Christian would share their faith, probably the average new conversion was sharing their faith 20 to 30 times a day, because that's all they saw the team doing every day. That's just what you do.
Right.
And it was hilarious. We had a sister from Kiev go to Odessa, and she got off the train and lost the address to where church was. And she didn't know how to find church on Sunday. So at 8 a.m, when the train arrived, church is at like 10. She said, I know how I can find church, because there were no cell phones or anything. She said, I'll go to the center of the city and I'll just stand there and someone will invite me. So she got out of the train, walked to the center of the city, and stood there with her suitcase waiting for a Christian to invite her, because Christians were always inviting everybody in the center of the city to come to church. And true church, God bless whoever it was, but somebody walked up to her like a half hour before church and said, hey, do you want to come to church? And she's like, I'm waiting for you guys to get me to come and invite me. I'm a Christian from Kiev. I just didn't know where church was.
That's hilarious.
I think when you have that kind of critical mass of just,
right.
Hey, I may get rejected today, I may not, but this whole city is going to get invited to church.
Right.
And God is always working in the hearts of people. You just never know when the right time is. And I think we have to recreate that culture. But anyways, those churches that were planted with smaller teams, some of them, like even when Kiev gets stuck now, there's still a genetic code we can remember.
Right.
We know. We know what that can, we remember how we lived and we know what it looks like. But we have some churches who don't have that genetic code, who don't have that experience. So it's very hard to create that. So that's what this team is about. Basically, me and my wife, seeing as God has blessed Ukraine with now 8 churches and a couple thousand Christians, and it's on a critical path to raise up new elders, raise up new evangelists. But the other Eastern European countries haven't had that. So we want to devote our lives in this next chapter. Can we recreate what Kiev and St. Petersburg and Moscow had? Can we recreate it in these other countries, these countries that never really had that?
Okay.
And so we've appealed to the people who have graduated college, and we appeal to the retirees, because in my book, Matthew 28 isn't just talking to people who just graduated college.
Right.
Could we get some retirees to come? Could we get some one-year challenge people to come, put together a team, and build such tight relationships before we land that everyone can see the love for one another?
Right.
And we land, and for 10 months, we just share our faith every single day and beg God to bring open hearts. And God willing, we'll see 100 baptisms, 50 baptisms, I don't know, whatever God gives.
Right.
And then you've taken the church from 90 to 190 in 1 year.
Right.
And now you have half the church who's never seen a church not having consistent radical growth. They don't understand what the other parts experienced. And I think then you get the critical mass and you start to change the genetic code of the faith of the church. So that's kind of the dream and the vision.
That's a great plan. So what you're doing is you're forming a team and getting there. I'm assuming they're going to come to Kiev first. You're working with them like a small D group. That's like your pre-mission period. And then where's your first target?
So actually we've started. We do Saturday Zoom calls. Okay. Saturday kind of staff meetings. We got 28 people who've signed up on the team.
Wow.
They're all raising their own funds to come. We need basically $240,000 to launch the entire team. Basically, we're asking people to live, raise $1,000 for each month. So you come for 10 months. The goal is to raise $10,000. So basically $2,000 is the 2 plane tickets back and forth. So you have $800 a month to live on while you're in Budapest. And devote 10 months. Don't look for a job. Preach the word. Me and Lena will train them. We'll walk with them. And let's just pray for God to do something amazing.
Now that's...
And so the goal is to raise two. I think the total is like 230,000 for the whole team. They've already raised 190 of that amount. So we're almost there.
That's exciting.
So we come together every Saturday, and actually we've been studying your book. So the team is totally fired up about having the right motivation, staying focused, being single-minded. I mean, some of the great things you taught in your book, outstanding. But we're basically training on a weekly basis. And the dream is that we land in August 15th in Budapest. We're going to be there for 10 months. And we're just praying to save tons of souls.
That's exciting. So you're going to go with a team of 28. And how many disciples are there now? There's 90 in Budapest right now?
Right. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And so you're going to go there for 10 months. And then what's the plan there? What's stage 2?
So
you leave the church, you've got 190. That's the goal.
Right.
What do you do?
So usually when people go on mission teams like this, 1/3 will, maybe 10% won't even stay the entire time, because it's not for everybody. It sounds like fun, but it's not for everybody. 1/3 of them will say that was great, but I'm ready to go home. Mm-hmm. And then I think there'll be 1/3 that'll say, you couldn't drag me out of here if you wanted to.
Right.
And I'm hoping some people will buy the farm like me and Lena did.
Right.
And so the dream is that God will raise up some people on this team who will catch the dream, and then they can come with me and Lena to the next country.
Okay.
And we can eventually start to place interns or church leaders or go to new countries. We have 6 countries with no church at all. So even as we think about getting to all the countries today, I think Mike Tolliver on Kidogo is starting a country countdown. 1/3 of all the countries that we don't have a church in are all in Eastern Europe. So we just need the resources. We need some, and I think this is, if you think kingdom wide, what are the 2 resources that I think we really need to capitalize on? And I think the Mormons do this well. They send their young people over for a year or 2,
right,
to really adopt the mission in their hearts.
Yep.
And some will stay, and praise God, but that's not going to be the majority. But then the ones that go home, they become an advocate for special missions. They view their neighborhood as a mission field. Mm-hmm. They have a reference point for the mission. We have too many people graduating college that are just trying to get into their careers and figure out how to set up their 401ks.
Right.
In their 30s. Right. Take a year, give back to God.
That's right.
Jesus, come on, and then I think if we had every campus kid somehow thinking, I'm going to spend a year or 2 to strengthen the needy areas, and some of these could be in the States too. I don't think let's target the 100 churches who most need help, and each 2 years send people out, right? You have 1,000 grads in the United States. Let's divvy them up and send them out to the 100 most needy churches. Take 1,000 retirees. There's so much depth in the churches in America.
My gosh, isn't that the truth?
You speak with a family group leader in Boston or Chicago who's got 40 years of experience. Their kids are Christians. They've led family groups. They've baptized. They counseled. These guys have more training than some of our full-time ministers over here.
Right.
And if they could take a year, and you can come over to Eastern Europe and live on 1/10 of what it costs you to live in America. Come spend a year, live off your retirement, and help us out, because we're first-generation Christianity over here. There were no Christians when we were growing up in this part of the world. There's no reference point. So it's a clean slate. But we just don't have the examples. We don't have so that's kind of the dream with this. So for the next 10 years, we'd like to pick 5 or 6 countries. And then I think find other people like us, like the Skinners or the Petruzzis, or people who can come over and take 2 or 3 countries and inspire a team to come with them and land for a year and help rebuild, strengthen a foundation that then can evangelize that country for the next 10, 20 years.
That's exciting. I'm getting excited. I'm getting excited when you're talking about this. I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds fantastic. I'm gonna have to keep this secret from my wife. She's gonna want to start packing her bags right now. I think it's a fantastic idea, Shawn. Now, here's a couple things I want to ask about Hungary. From my time overseas, I understand it has the hardest language in the world to learn.
Right.
Well, I don't want to get too deep into it. What's your game plan to help people with language acquisition in Hungary? I heard it's just totally unique language. They don't even know the origins of it, and it's super tough.
Right. No, that's true. Basically, the team's just coming for 10 months, so the goal is not to learn the language.
Okay, so you don't, you're coming there and you feel like, let's say a person's going, I'd like to go. That sounds so cool. I want to go. Maybe they're retirees but they're going, I'm not that great at languages. What would you tell them?
Right. I would say come. I think that pretty much describes our whole team. And me and Lena won't pick up the language the time we're there. The way we did it when we landed in Kiev or Russia, we were given the charge even before we came to start praying for our Aaron, the person who could speak to the people for us.
Mm-hmm.
So I was praying before I landed, God, give me my translator. Help me to find the guy who can get baptized and then follow me around and study the Bible with everyone. And until you find that person, you really can't do the mission. So I literally was walking up and down the street every day by myself in St. Petersburg until I met my translator. And once I met him, and it was incredible. I don't know if we have time, but it was incredible. I gave up. I was inviting 100 people a day and didn't find anyone who spoke English. And so there was no one to study the Bible with. And so I prayed specifically. I said, okay, God, let this guy be blonde haired, about 5'10", and have on a red shirt. And that's going to be my translator, because I know you want to give me this guy. I just must not be recognizing him. So that day I didn't invite anyone. I was just walking up and down the street looking for the guy in the red shirt, and I found him. So I stopped him and I said, hey, I want to invite you to church. And he turned around. He had an English Bible in his hand.
That's amazing.
I said, do you speak English? And he said, yeah. And I said, that's a Bible. And he said, yeah. And I said, would you like to study the Bible? He said, sure. And I said, how about now? And he said, okay. I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
Oh my gosh.
So we walked over to the park and started to study the Bible. He was baptized 6 days later. And then he was the one who was with me when we studied the Bible with like the 60 men who got baptized in the next 5 or 6 months. So, but he, and then now he's leading Hope Worldwide in Moscow. So wow. But anyways, it was interesting. I met him, when I later asked him, what were you doing with an English Bible in your hand? And he said he had walked into a group like 200 meters before me that was passing out Bibles. And when they passed him out a Bible, they were Americans. They passed him out a Bible. And he said, hey, could you study this with me? Wow. And the guy said, well, no, because we're just here for 2 weeks over the summer to pass out Bibles. We don't do that.
Oh, gosh.
And he walked away so discouraged. And he said he was just walking discouraged with this Bible, that he has this Bible, but no one to study it with. And literally 2 minutes later, I stopped him and I said, do you want to study the Bible?
Wow.
And it was very funny, because he asked me, how long are you staying? And I said, I'm staying for good. And he said, oh, no, you didn't understand what I asked you. I said, how long are you staying? And I said, well, I'm staying for good. And he thought I just didn't understand his Russian or something, because no one stays. Right. The Americans come for the summer for a month, and then they go home. Nobody stays, not in the winter.
Right.
Oh, and he was so blown away, studied the Bible, became a Christian. But that's the goal. Everyone who's coming to Hungary, we're going to pray that we find our translator, our Aaron, in that first month. They become Christians, and then they help us to convert other people.
It reminds me of that story where Jesus is sending out his disciples on the limited commission, and he says, find a person of peace, or find the worthy person, and stay with that person. So basically you found that person with the red shirt, 5'10", blonde hair. What a story. And so, okay, so if a person's listening and they're thinking, man, that sounds awesome. I'd love to go to Europe. I'd love to go on a mission team. So what you're saying is really all they need is a year of their time, $10,000, support themselves, and just a desire to share their faith. That's pretty much it.
That's pretty much it.
That's awesome. And so where would they contact you? I guess I can just leave that in the notes for this podcast, but if they wanted to reach you before then, where would they contact you?
Totally, yeah. On Facebook, Shawn Wooten or Shawn's Borscht. And, the team to launch this August is kind of solidified. And some of those guys on the team, they have GoFundMe. They're still trying to raise the money. They haven't quite hit the amount they need. So we're all really praying and fasting to finish the fundraiser. But then, of course, with the virus, borders aren't open right now. We can't get into Hungary right now. So we've basically set up 4 flags that are all red, and those red flags have to turn green before the team can launch. So we're really praying for that to happen. But we'll, at some point we'll put out an advertisement, whatever, like, hey, come join the Revive team 2021 or 2022 for Athens, Greece, or Zagreb or Bucharest or Warsaw or Istanbul, and we'll just put it out there, and people can sign up and say, I want to go. And they just need to raise some money to support themselves for that year. And then if their dream is to go into the ministry, we have 6 of the positions on our team are actually campus ministers. They're actually kind of supported by the mission team, because the dream is that they would become the next church leaders, or come with us to the next country. So there's opportunities to stay in Eastern Europe forever. There's countries that need to be led. There's cities that need to be planted. There's lots to do. So if you have an ambition to be in the full-time ministry and to lead a church, come by the farm.
Right.
But the great thing is that you have a year to test it.
Right.
You you give a year, and then you see.
There's no shame if a person just says, "Hey, I just want to go and give a year and then come back." That's going to be fine too.
Right. That's actually all we expect from anybody.
Yeah, that's great.
So yeah.
Okay.
And then it's the memories and it's the stories that will last you the rest of your life from that 10-month adventure. It'll be unbelievable.
Yeah. It's really inspiring, because I know I've been talking to Glenn Petruzzi, and he came up with a proposal that shares a lot of the same features of this plan. It's just like synchronicity, how you thought this plan up, Glenn thought this plan up right around the same time. It must be the Spirit who is stirring things up. It's very, very exciting to me, and I just think it's fantastic. Now, at the 2016 Reach Conference, I mentioned this earlier, you preached to the general audience. You had lots of slides about growing our family of churches from around 100,000 disciples to 1 million disciples. Obviously, this has got to be part of your plan. How can we do that? Like that, this is so interesting to me. How can we break the log jam and start growing exponentially? What are your thoughts? If you were the king of the world, what would you do?
I'd recommend everyone read the book 0 to 100. Sorry, bro. I'm a big fan.
Oh, thank you.
So I think, boy, it's challenging, right? There's lots of thoughts at many different levels. I think as a movement, if we utilize if you utilize the retired people, you utilize the young professionals in the campus, if everyone's devoted to evangelizing the world, right? I mean, when I became a Christian, churches were being planted and dreams were happening, and I was like, Wall Street, who cares about Wall Street?
Right.
We're changing the world.
Exactly.
And I think if we can re-elevate that to become not just a slogan that everyone's memorized, but they see everyone engaging at that level. I'm so proud of these guys on the Revive team. They're quitting jobs.
Wow.
At a time like this, you don't quit your job. They're quitting jobs.
Right.
I have retired people who are just planning on spending down their savings and their retirement to come to help change a country for eternity.
Yes.
And to get the significance of what we're doing back up to where it's supposed to be,
right.
where God meant it to be.
Right.
And then I think once you get in an environment, I'm sure my evangelism is going to grow exponentially when I land in Budapest, because I'm with a team that's just what we do.
Right.
I can be so busy today and do great things for God,
right,
and not share my faith.
Right.
And I can go to bed feeling like I gave it all today for the kingdom.
Right.
But I still didn't share my faith. And we want to develop the churches and mature them. So there's so many things you can do that don't really have to do with saving a lost world.
Right.
And I think that's the challenge we all face, because not all of us are naturally comfortable doing that. There's some people who are very good at that just all by themselves. Some of us have to carry our cross to be good at that. But whether we're carrying our cross or whether it's a natural gift, we all have to engage that.
Right.
And so I think creating these places where we can reinvigorate, and I've even thought of doing the Revive program inside the Kiev church or inside the Odessa church. It doesn't have to be in a different country.
Right.
Where you focus in the energy. And then I think the comments you've made about the large church needs to become small, I think that's huge. Where it's not just staff run church. It's maybe someone's training the people, but we're working with the people around us I've seen John McGurk do a great job with that. Joe Filippo, great job. Andy
Mm-hmm.
Fleming in Birmingham,
Mm-hmm.
where you land in a church with no staff. It's what you've been doing as well. And you're really building up the leaders. Everyone owns the church. It's not just the staff is busy doing everything. And that's the challenge when your church becomes big.
Right.
All your best friends are on staff. Everything's decided on staff. And not everyone's people are watching the triathlon, but they're not running it.
Right.
And so, I think that's some of the challenges to bring Christianity back to every household.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I agree with you. I think that, we have some amazing large churches that are just so filled with experienced people, lots of resources, but it takes a lot to maintain a church of 1,000 or 3,000. I mean, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of attention. You need a lot of young people. And one thing that I see is those people, those large churches are able to hire younger people, but they don't get the opportunity to maybe go out and plant a church like you did, like I did, like I had the opportunity to do. And I think that's a lost opportunity, because I think that if you're leading a ministry in a large church, that's a certain experience, but there's nothing that can replace the opportunity to go out and plant a church where there's really nothing there. And I feel like that is training that cannot be replaced. That is something that you can't experience in a larger church. The desperation, the fear, the insecurity, the testing, the challenge, like, oh Lord, if you don't come through here, I don't know what's going to happen. That kind of where it all depends on you, and yet it's got to depend on God. And I think that experience is something that we're going to need to bring back into the kingdom. And what you're talking about, the singular focus of sharing your faith and just having a clear passion and mission. It's hard to get that in a larger church. I know what it's like. And my church is not even that big, but it's like you get busy with maintenance.
Right.
And there's pastoring issues. There's counseling issues that can take up all your time. I totally agree with you. So I don't want to get off that, but I think what you're doing there is something that I'm going to be watching super closely. I think that it's what we need.
You're going to be watching super closely from Budapest, Hungary, because you're coming over to spend time with us, bro.
I can't wait. As soon
as we can get these airplanes flying again.
Yes.
But I think you're right. I think we need to have a church planting mentality of even neighborhoods, right?
Right.
You get two families in a neighborhood and then you inspire let's plant the church in this neighborhood.
Well, I totally agree with you. And it's something I've been thinking very strongly about, even in the church here in Tucson, Arizona. It's like, we can't meet at our normal large church location, but I'm thinking, okay, what is God trying to do here? Maybe this is the time when we need to start meeting by, smaller towns, in the metropolis, because there's, Tucson has a bunch of smaller towns that surround it that form its perimeter. I think maybe this is the time when we've got leaders that are leading groups of 30 or 40 and they take on a much larger role, whether it's preaching or teaching. And I get excited about that, because I go, that's when we're going to start really multiplying.
Totally. We had an interesting situation. It was, me and Linda had landed in the summer. The church was like 150. And by New Year's, it was 512. And I checked kind of the world stats that there never been a church over 500 that had doubled in 1 year. So we set the goal to double. We prayed and the staff fasted that we were going to be 1,024 by the end of the year. And then interesting enough, mid-January, the police came into our service and kicked us out and canceled our registration and told us we could no longer meet together as a church. So we're a church of 500 with baby Christians, and we can no longer meet in groups of more than 10. So what we did is we took all the money, we were renting halls, and we went out and rented like 16 apartments spread out all over the city. And these apartments were empty, but they became churches. And we let singles and campus people live there and maintain the apartments, but that's where church was now.
Wow.
So we appointed basically 30 church leaders overnight. And we started to train them every week on how to lead a church, how to do a Sunday sermon, how to do communion, how to do midweek, how to take up contribution. They literally had to take responsibility for everything, because literally overnight we lost any ability to gather the church. And I thought, this is a disaster. God, what are you doing? We just prayed to double the church. Now we lost our halls. Now we're not going to grow at all. This is going to be terrible. But what actually happened was the exact opposite. All of a sudden, we had 30 people in the church who felt complete ownership for everything. And I mean, they were getting trained in everything, how to lead Bible studies, how to count. We would still do the cost counting with the staff, but they were preaching. They were doing Bible talks. They were doing midweeks. And it was unbelievable. Now, we had a couple of the house churches almost split that we had to do, but basically my whole life became just training these church leaders. That's all I did.
Right.
And we were underground for 7 months. We couldn't meet in groups of more than 10. And after 7 months, the church had grown from 500 to 800.
Wow.
While we were in house churches. Then we came out of house churches, and it was unbelievable because, first of all, there was so much joy to finally be back together again.
Right.
It's kind of my picture of when we get out of quarantine.
Right.
Everyone's so fired up and then all of a sudden, when I gathered the staff before the church service, when we were all together, I had 30 people looking at me that were used to leading church.
Right.
And I mean, oh my gosh, they knew how to get their group together afterwards, talk about everything. I mean, there was so much ownership and leadership in the church at that hour. It just projected. I mean, we God did it. We grew exactly to 1,024 by the end of that year.
That's
God
amazing.
doubled the church. But what I thought was a tragedy of us being forced into smaller groups of 10, it actually turned out to be the greatest blessing, because we actually focused on raising up leaders instead of the ministers doing all the work. So it was awesome.
That's powerful. What year was that?
That was 1994.
Okay, so that's when you came. How long had you been in town before you had the police raid the church?
8 months.
8 months. Okay, so you had just taken over and had been there for 8 months. See, that's very powerful. I think that's super instructive for our current situation with coronavirus, because it's affecting the whole world. And I think, okay, what can God do to accelerate the growth? And I think, I've been talking to Bruce Williams and different people and talking to different leaders, and the constant theme is you have to multiply the leaders. You've got to concentrate on discipleship, and I think what you're sharing there is the key. I feel like we've got to take advantage of the difficulty we're facing and view it, change it from the obstacle to the path, the tool that God is going to use to help us to grow, if we'll accept it, and not just hold our breath, but go, okay, if we go with this, God is going to make it grow. I think you're right on target.
Amen. Yeah, I think it's interesting. When we come out of this quarantine, the new world, I think, is going to be safe in groups of 10 to 20, which I think is the perfect number to expand and for the kingdom to thrive.
Yep.
And, Bible talks of 10 to 20 people, they can grow, they can multiply. And I think we have to resist the temptation right now to do these big online services that everyone comes to.
Right.
Let's start massively training the ones who are going to be leading the groups of 10 or 20 when we come out of this.
Right.
Let's get them all up to speed, and then actually get them to start to lead even online. So there's that closeness, that family, that expansion happening at a smaller group level. I think we try and compete sometimes, I think, in our minds with these mega churches. I just don't think it's the way.
I don't think it's the way at all. I totally agree. And I went to a small group meeting, had about 10 people this last Sunday, and I came away so fired up because I thought, this is it. It's led by a guys like 30, younger, and it's filled with a bunch of young people. And I came away going, this is ready to grow. They had a couple there that's studying the Bible. They brought their own food. They're in their living room. I thought, okay, it just felt like right at home. I thought, this is what we need to do throughout the entire church, just small groups. And I had the intern that I'm training. He preached to the group, and I just watched him and evaluated. And I thought, this is it. This is the atmosphere, the vibe that needs to happen. It's fine to listen to a sermon, but there's a disconnect. You can just sit there and be completely disconnected, as opposed to this group, which was everyone was involved. Everyone's doing something. So
right.
I think
that's good stuff.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I could just talk. I'm going to have to kind of wrap this up here. Could talk to you so much longer about this.
Well, then I need my turn to ask you all these questions back at you, bro. I guess I have to start my own podcast.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that'd be great. So this must be just getting you super excited. I probably don't even have to ask what's getting you excited these days. But what advice would you give to someone like yourself, Shawn, man or woman, who wants to live a life of mission, a life of adventure, totally sold out for God? What advice would you give them to just kind of get started?
Well, I would say they're definitely on the right track. God definitely created them for that desire. And they have gifts that they haven't even scratched the surface of. And God can do things in their life that even if we told them right now, they wouldn't believe it. And so I think just the acknowledgement of saying, that's what I want, you're already headed down the right road for sure. Now you just need some like-minded thinkers, some people that can be your support, because you will have resistance and you will have suffering and it'll get hard. And that's all part of God training you to be able to do what it is you really want to do. Resistance training. It's you're going to suffer. So you've got to have people around you who won't let you off the hook.
Right.
Who won't say, you really don't have to do that. Or,
right.
Dude, why don't you just relax? Or, get some like-minded people and absolutely find someone to mentor and disciple you. I think discipling is huge.
Yeah.
I can't exist without having someone discipling me.
Right.
I don't care how. Some people try to tell me, dude, you're already 50. I mean, really, do you really need somebody to still? Absolutely.
You're right.
Absolutely. Right. Oh my gosh. my character's not there. There's no way I can see my blind sides.
Right.
And the Spirit is teaching people all over the world. How can I not take time to learn from them? There's no way I know what I'm doing. And if I want to see a church of 100,000, really, do you think I am who I need to be for a church, for us to see 100,000 disciples in a country?
Right.
No. Oh my gosh. I got miles to go. So let's get started.
That's right.
And enjoy it.
Enjoy it.
So many people are like, when will I finally get to a point when people stop telling me what to do and I can just do what I want to do? Wrong road.
Exactly.
Wrong road. I'm not getting on that road.
Exactly. That's great. Any final words, Shawn? This has been a fantastic time together. Anything that you want to throw in there?
I just appreciate, bro, this time, because I feel like you've kind of refreshed my spirit for sure. And I just think resources that you're providing, and just really your story of risking everything, your business and everything, to go plant a church from your family, and now what you're doing in Arizona, it's so inspiring. And I think imitation is it's something that the Bible talks about, and I think if you're on this podcast and you really want to grow, imitate the faith of people who are out there, your ministers, your leaders. But I just appreciate what you're doing for the kingdom. And I do, and we're waiting for you to come be with us in Budapest.
Can't wait.
And to teach. It'll be awesome.
Yeah.
But pray for us. It's a very hard time to figure out how to launch this thing, to not put people in danger. And, when you want to bring a team of 28 who are going to share their faith all day, and social distancing is like, people are avoiding each other.
Right. Exactly.
Is this, how do we launch this properly that it'll be effective, not just bold, but effective?
Right.
It's a very tricky time, and there's definitely some cloudiness or unclearness in my mind. So any prayers that your listeners can make and offer up for me, that God will give us clarity on how to do this. I would be very thankful.
Yeah, you got it. In fact, let me just say a little prayer for you right now. And
Awesome.
I think it just feels right. Lord, I want to pray for the work that Shawn is doing in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. I pray that you'll lay a blessing on it. And I pray for those who are considering joining that work or imitating the work there, wherever they're at around the world. Pray that you'll bless it and give everyone the courage to make decisions to seek first your kingdom. Bless Shawn, bless Lena, bless their family and the church. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Hey, Shawn, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic time.
Thanks
for listening. Here's how you can help support the program. First, let your friends know about the podcast. Secondly, read and review one of my books, either How to Plant and Grow a Church or Courage, How to Make This Life Count. You can find them on Amazon.com. Finally, support the program with a gift today. The link is in the show notes because my goal is to inspire you to make this life count, live a no-regrets life, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day and make this life count.